My name's Sholeh, and I'm an associate at Julie's Bicycle. I was full-time at Julie's Bicycle when we started conceiving of the idea for our Creative Europe project, which is called Creative Climate Leadership. And I've been involved with the project throughout, but I do have to credit the fact that my colleague, Chiara Bardiali at Julie's Bicycle, was really kind of the consistent project manager throughout the last 3 years. So I've tried to get as much detail as I can, but you'll have to forgive me if you ask a fascinatingly detailed question and I can't quite get to the heart of it, but I will if it's information you feel that you really need afterwards. So, lots that resonates with Sarah's presentation, but just to kind of give you a bit of background for us, this Creative Europe project really built on quite a few years' worth of research, development, partnership building and international work. And the kind of critical milestones of that for us were a report that we did with the International Federation for Arts Councils and Cultural Agencies in 2014 called The Arts and Environmental Sustainability. And at this point, I've realized I haven't really told you who Julie's Bicycle is and what we've done. I've just assumed that everybody has some kind of background. So for anyone who doesn't, Julie's Bicycle is an organization. We're UK-based, but we work globally. And we sit at the intersection between the arts and environmental sustainability. We're a support organisation working to kind of galvanise the arts and culture with tools, resources, capacity building, and dot connecting to be able to respond practically to climate change, but also to connect the dots between the practical response and the way that art can particularly reach and connect with audiences and engage people with this critical question of how we respond to climate change. So this report that we did with Ithaca in the context of that work was really looking at how are cultural policymakers and cultural agencies around the world connecting cultural policy with environmental policy. And it was fascinating. We actually learned that quite a significant proportion of global arts councils and agencies were really starting to, or had inherently already connected culture and environment. But there was a lack of resource and capacity and kind of front-footedness in kind of mobilizing responses to the climate crisis specifically. And one of the many recommendations that came out of that report was to look at what would it look like if we created hubs around the world which developed expertise in environmental sustainability and interpreted that in ways that were geographically, culturally, and kind of economically specific to the regions that they were supporting. So that was kind of in our minds as something that would be great to do, as we were also doing a lot of networking, connecting, and training across Europe, certainly, and across different parts of the world. Then also in 2014, we released the first iteration of the Sustaining Creativity Survey, which has now been renamed as the Creative Climate Census. But it's the first and only longitudinal study of the attitudes and behaviours of cultural leaders around environmental sustainability. So it's basically a health check on cultural leadership on environmental sustainability. And that told us again that cultural leaders felt like it was a really important issue. They were starting to kind of connect the dots with its relevance to what they did as predominantly cultural producers and makers, but that there was this value-action gap between feeling that environment was incredibly important and acting on those values. And there was a call for kind of support in leadership development to make that stuff happen. In 2015, which was the year that we put in our Creative Europe application, we also saw a new set of sustainable development goals adopted by the UN, one of which is partnerships and collaboration. So one of our 2030 goals is to increase the amount of cooperation, collaboration and partnership that's going on to kind of meet these sustainable development targets. And of course in December there was the Paris climate talks where the first universal agreement on climate change took place. Now called the Paris Agreement, that gives us a framework for how globally we're going to respond to climate change. And of course, the EU has their own targets. So in this context, we really started to kind of conceive of a programme. And I have to say, it was also in response to more and more people and organisations coming to us saying, okay, we want to start Julie's Bicycle in Romania. How do we do it? And we kind of took stock and thought, okay, well, there's also an emerging economy of new cultural organizations here who want to take a leadership role in kind of building capacity for climate responses locally. How do we respond to that? We weren't resourced at that point to do it. So what we did was to conceive of creative climate leadership with a group of partners from across Europe who we had already begun to develop relationships with, and I'll talk you through them. But basically our common goal was to create a program for artists and cultural professionals to explore the cultural dimensions of climate change and take action with impact, creativity, and resilience. And our goal was really to say, how could we work through transnational mobility to create a better environment for innovation and collaborative solutions for the sector to become more sustainable? And how could we enable knowledge transfer, particularly where the UK's cultural scene when it comes to environmental sustainability is particularly developed, not just Julie's Bicycle, but also other organisations and artists in our cultural ecology are really leaders in this respect globally. So how can we kind of transfer some of that, but also learn from our partners who have different expertise towards this kind of shared goal? So we had 8 partners overall, including Julie's Bicycle. We were the lead partner, and because this was the first Creative Europe project we'd ever applied for to lead, we applied for a small cooperation project. So this might seem like quite a lot of partners, given that, but it was really important to us to really kind of achieve a geographic spread, and you'll see that as I talk through the partners individually. A spread in art form, so really our goal was to engage across all different art forms, so we wanted that represented in the group of partners. We also brought in organisations with different kinds of scales, so that wasn't so much kind of by design, but it did have a kind of impact on the partnership. Different kinds of focus and expertise within this goal of training and creating capacity building for the sector. So one of our first ports of call were PINA. They're an organisation based in Slovenia. We had previously kind of interacted with them via a round table that we'd pulled together in the Netherlands, looking at how we could look at perhaps a European-wide cultural application to the Horizon 2020 programme, which didn't quite materialise, but it gave us the opportunity to familiarise. They're an arts and society organisation looking at kind of human rights, democracy, and sustainable development. They also have an arts program, social program, and they do a lot of capacity building for NGOs, not only in Slovenia, but in Central and Southern Europe. And really the call to them was, as predominantly a training organisation, they had a series of expertise, and not only that, but networks, that was very kind of well practiced in training design, facilitation methodologies, all things that kind of felt very complementary to us, where we were kind of bringing kind of research tools, resources, and it really felt like we could meet in the middle around designing the training programs that we wanted to. Then we had On the Move, who we'd collaborated with quite a bit before. So On the Move are a kind of a network of networks looking at cultural mobility across Europe. And previously with them, we'd published a Green Mobility Guide, and they had then gone on to publish a Green Mobility Charter. And so they felt like a great partner to help cement this idea of how we can use mobility to improve our response to environmental sustainability, but also to kind of leverage their influence through all of the networks that are members of their core network. Then Coal, who are based in France, with, I believe, a kind of base in Brussels as well. They are a curatorial organisation in the French language, curating projects around the environment. They were quite critical in pulling together the Art COP programme, which was a global programme of artistic work around COP in Paris, where the Paris Agreement was signed. And their focus was on the visual arts. Then we had Ars Baltica, an artists and cultural organisation network across the Baltic region. Krug, who are active in the Western Balkans. They run an annual Green Culture Festival. Exit Foundation, who run the Exit Festival in Serbia, but also are quite influential in festival networks across Europe. And they obviously have a command of an amazing audience. And so they were quite interesting in terms of looking at different strategies for connecting with audiences. And then Mitos 21, who are a network that represents some of the major national theatres across Europe. So as you can see, a really mixed group, a lot of representation from networks, and then some serious expertise there in terms of training design, working with policymakers. So both On the Move, COAL and Ars Baltica have all had experience in working with cultural policymakers around kind of themes of environmental sustainability. So this was our kind of core of partners. I think the important thing maybe to kind of mention briefly about funding in this mix was that most of these organizations, I would say, are probably kind of micro-organizations, particularly the networks, although they represent very big and well-resourced organizations across Europe. And so the way that the funding was organized was that we had two kind of pillar organizations, which were Julie's Bicycle and PINA, who are comparatively kind of larger organizations with good resource, with capacity to kind of bring in match funding. And other partners had a much smaller budget and distinct parts of the program that they were kind of leading on. And those were, so this is how our activity broke down. So as I said, the kind of core of our program was 2 leadership training intensives, and some mentoring that went with that, which was conceived of and facilitated by Julie's Bicycle and PINA. Then we had an alumni network, which kind of gave some consistency to our support to participants across the 3-year program, which was again facilitated by JB and PINA. We then had some action grants which participants could apply to, and those again were kind of administered by Julie's Bicycle and PINA, and as you can see, that kind of package of work was really kind of led by those 2 organizations. Then we ran a couple of policy labs with the organizations I mentioned who'd really had experience with that, and those were On the Move, Ars Baltica and Julie's Bicycle, and those policy labs took place in Leeuwarden in the Netherlands, which was the capital of culture last year, in 2018, and in Stockholm in Sweden, where there was a kind of gathering of over 600 cultural policymakers from the Baltic region. Then there were 2 conferences, and these were led by Krug, again, Julie's Bicycle and Exit, and then we had a festival, Hot Desk at Exit Festival, which was an opportunity to kind of test out different strategies for engaging with audiences. And as you can see, JB was quite involved in all of the activity and kind of connecting with what Sarah said. It was really important to us that every partner was involved with kind of actively leading on something, but we were kind of there as a touch point to kind of bring the program together and stitch it together, and to be able to offer the kind of research and expertise that we've had the ability to kind of garner through a lot of our international work to date. So our timeline for application development was really tight. Definitely leave more time than you think it takes. So we got onto it quite late, or that's definitely how it felt. We were kind of cooking up this idea for a while, but kind of caught on to the opportunity to go for a cooperation project while we were kind of scanning for what European funding would be appropriate for a Europe-wide program for us. And so we kind of got started quite rapidly in July and August, which is absolutely miraculous given how absolutely all of our European partners were kind of clocking off on holiday. One, in fact, his baby was being born as we were kind of pulling together the project documents. So there was some really serious commitment from this group of people coming together, which was amazing. We really had crunch time in September, kind of pulling together the application with some great help from the Creative Europe team, and I have to say, help from a fundraising consultant who was very practiced with doing European funding applications, which for us was incredibly helpful, not only given the amount of time we were trying to pull this together in, but because having that expertise shorthands so much of the time it takes to sometimes interpret what the application is really looking for, and how to structure things like budgets and stuff. So definitely more time is welcome. It's good to plan. So in terms of outcomes, we've had an amazing kind of 3 years. We've, obviously I said, 7 partners in addition to Julie's Bicycle, 2 training courses which trained 48 artists and creative professionals, including actually several development professionals who really wanted to connect with the arts and use creative methodologies, and participants from 15 countries. So we did have participants from outside of Europe, which was made possible by some of the conditions Christoph was saying, and being able to offer grants to kind of associate partners, which really brought some amazing perspectives into the room. It was really important to us that there were participants from different parts of the world, particularly the Global South, in the room to offer a kind of different perspective on what it means to kind of collaborate on climate change outside of Europe as well, and what we can be learning from, as well as how we can be in solidarity with colleagues in different parts of the world. Policy Lab, conference and launch event. We had 6 media outputs, so that was kind of film series and articles from 2 of the participants who were respectively filmmakers and writers. We had 13 action grants went out. We originally budgeted for 6, and this is where sometimes, I might talk about in the learning as well, your project activity will evolve. And so once we were kind of convinced of the absolute integrity and creativity and amazing expertise of some of our participants, we decided to kind of change how we organise that and dish out kind of slightly smaller grants that would be real enablers for projects. And that led to all sorts, the creation of new cultural work, the creation of new campaigns, dissemination events that kind of took the learning from this core group of 48 people out to many, many others across Europe. So all of those participants actually led dissemination events. And of those dissemination events, we reached about 3,000 people in 18 countries, so this multiplier effect from the core training. We had about 10 artistic works coming out of the program, reaching about over 20,000 audiences across Europe. Participants leveraged over 100 grand in euros for their own projects. We had 9 new business startups. And everyone came away with a new kind of green business plan, which was really important to us. So those were our kind of successes, which were enabled, I suppose, as much by the participants actually kind of taking that initial moment together, and some of our support to kind of create their own communication and collaboration networks informally between each other. So one of the goals for our training, and not only the partnership, was to increase cooperation between the participants themselves. And that has been relatively successful. So even just those kind of that intense week of time and some focus. So we did a whole workshop on how to collaborate well, using some of our learning from the program itself, and harnessing the learning from the group. That's been amazing to see, again, as a multiplier effect. There've been some great legacy projects. So in terms of how this has affected our work at Julie's Bicycle, Creative Climate Leadership has kind of evolved into several new programs, using the learning from that experience. One is the Arts Council Accelerator program, which is similarly a creative leadership program for organizations and artists who want to up-level their environmental actions. And then we're also planning a creative climate training series in the US, hopefully for 2020. But partners also have evolved their programs using the learning from this. So PINA has launched a Slovenian network of centres of research arts, which includes a significant strand around creative climate leadership. And others are similarly kind of developing new programs based on some of the kind of interactions and experiences from our collaboration. So in terms of reflections, as I said, it's been really fantastic to kind of just see a much wider impact possible through this event by working in cooperation. We've had 100% excellent and good feedback from participants, which I think is absolutely testament to the quality of the way that our partners work, as well as our kind of collective effort. Policy initiatives have really kind of built a lot of constructive dialogue with policymakers that have helped advance that agenda. All of the programme activity was delivered collaboratively. I know that is kind of should be a tick box for everything, but it has felt like a success. And it really felt like the partners had been given roles that were kind of suited to their capacity and expertise. And there was lots and lots of learning. For us, that's been a huge success. And some of that comes out of the challenges. One of those challenges was working with organisations with varying degrees of kind of capacity, particularly around reporting. And as Sarah was saying, being able to interpret the needs and demands of the Creative Europe reporting process. There were some challenges around just cultural differences in communication and working style, and things like people being away for most of the summer that we had to adapt to. And partly because of that, partly because in collaboration it just works this way, planning did take almost twice as long, and took a lot more kind of communication, honesty, and being prepared to kind of sit back and say, okay, maybe I've got something wrong here, tell me what I need to know or what's going on. And also kind of really being able to acknowledge where we had expertise and where we didn't have expertise, and where that kind of collaboration could really come into its own. Some of the activity negotiation was relatively challenging, just because some of our activity was originally due to take place in Montenegro, led by Krug, but it was pretty much coinciding with the climate talks in Katowice in Poland, and it really felt at that point that actually we need to have a presence at that global event to share and platform the expertise of the participants who've come through the programme. And so we took a decision to kind of change location, but that obviously had some kind of logistical repercussions for Krug as a partner. So it is really worth kind of building into your original negotiations with people how to renegotiate activity when that happens, and what the boundaries are between when that's feasible and when it's not feasible. And then obviously it's so important to kind of keep everybody informed and engaged with decisions throughout and between meetings, particularly when you're not face to face. But we actually had quite a pool of partners, and that at times felt like a challenge in terms of really being able to kind of keep everybody on board at every stage when people are leading on different things at different times over actually quite a long period, so 3 years. So I know I'm racing through this, but hopefully anything you want unpacked can be in the questions. But briefly, in terms of learning, we've said it before, but really make time. Discuss expectations, values, what your vision is together beforehand. Really take that time to kind of build a strong foundation for your project, and try not to make too many assumptions about kind of just rolling with it as you go through. The more detail and the more agreement you can make about how you want to work together, as well as what you want to do, will really make a difference to that collaboration as you move through. Create reporting systems that make sense to everyone, so really checking in with people on what they understand and what they don't. The same with yourselves, and really kind of come back to these regularly. Like Sarah's point was bang on. I can't say we've ever been so ahead of the game in terms of final reporting, but it really is worth kind of using that as a touchstone to come back to, rather than an afterthought of what you need to kind of release that next pot of funding. And then remembering really that collaboration is just about relationships between people. I think a lot of Sarah's examples describe that perfectly, and it's really like about developing that relationship through talking, through picking up the phone. I can't say that we were all so ready to get on planes, because part of this was about measuring our carbon footprint and reducing it, which we obviously would have done if we had got on a plane or a train indeed. But yes, absolutely, that point about connecting is critical. So that's our story, and we can unpack in questions if there's anything you're curious about. But this is our amazing group of participants.
I have a few more slides. So the how and the how of Creative Europe and applications I'll cover in a bit. And yeah, any questions to our speakers?
Hello, I'd like to know how you went about match funding for each organisation that you were working with.
Well, we are MPO funded, so for us we had to take that from within that allocation. So we were able to build it into our kind of future plan. And same was said of the other companies, basically. They're not MPO funded, they're in different countries, but they all have their core funding except for the 2 that we fully funded within the project. So 5 of us all have really, really supportive kind of national funding bodies that they can draw down on to do that. But it was all within their funding agreements that they already had negotiated for the next X number of years. So that's why it's quite a big commitment, especially at the point when we got turned down. We were going, oh, does that still work, time-wise? So yeah, for us it was, in theory, sort of a simple answer of the match funding came from within core, like really well-funded companies, which we're very lucky with, yeah.
I'm not sure if this is still the case moving forward, but part of match funding in-kind time and support was eligible. So that, if I'm not mistaken, and I'll just caveat my answer with not having had the budget in my mind for a while, but predominantly for the much smaller partners, their time was matched in kind, other than when they were partnering with other institutions or platforms like the Capital of Culture or other conferences which were able to kind of provide in-kind materials and space, and sometimes even some seed funding towards the event. And then, as Sarah was saying, for us as kind of larger organizations, the kind of bulk of that cash match funding did come from Julie's Bicycle and PINA. PINA are supported by the Ministry of Culture in Slovenia, and so they had some of that kind of core funding to contribute. Likewise, Julie's Bicycle had a kind of amalgamation of unrestricted funds coming from different sources, some Arts Council work, some trusts and foundations. Again, I won't kind of give detail that I don't have. But we were able to kind of muster some cash match from there, and then some in-kind to fill those gaps. So it was a mixture.
Thanks again.